everybody. This is Steve Falcon Napier. Welcome to the Circle of Brilliance. Today, we will hopefully finish up our discussion about relationship repair. So, what sorts of things can we be doing to help close the gaps that might have been created during times of opposing viewpoints, conflict, etc.? So, you guys are all allowed to talk. So, I've clicked on what I can click on. So, you all feel free to unmute yourself and chime in whenever you'd like. So before we finished the call on Tuesday, I said, here's kind of like the highlights of what I want to be able to go over to finish this subject up. I shifted a couple things around in the outline just because I thought they might flow a little bit better. And so on the screen right now, I imagine you guys are seeing my screen, managing your own tension. Yes?
Yes.
Yep. So let's just talk about that before you try to, have one of these conversations or you try to manage somebody else's level of tension. It's always good for you to be managing your own first. So the question becomes, where should you be on the change grid to do the best job of facilitating this sort of a discussion? And I think you guys already shared last time around that it's really, you want to be in power for sure. You'd certainly want to be more in the middle of the grid than way far out grid where you're being overly driven around the whole thing, or overly in grid where you're being way too cautious and timid than you need to be. You need to be someplace in the middle that just happens to put you in the center of the change grid. So now, I said, if you look on the outline here, that you're probably going to need to manage your own tension by doing some downgrid maneuvers and some PowerPoint maneuvers. Why would I say downgrid maneuvers? Why didn't I say you need to do upgrid maneuvers or in-grid maneuvers? If anything, it should be downgrid and outgrid. So tell me about that. Why did I not talk about the other two?
Well, you're making assumptions that you need to calm yourself down, which is the next thing. So
Yeah, well, and I'm thinking like, okay, who wants to have this conversation? I mean, you're the one that's reaching out.
yeah.
So obviously you've got some tension around it. Well, how much tension? And is that tension too far upgrade? Or is that tension slash drive too far outgrid? Because if you're too far upgrid, what kind of a conversation are you likely to have?
Yeah, it's not going to be good.
No, more because what happens upgrid? How do we behave? What's some of those characteristics of upgrid energy?
Hysteria.
Yeah, we're going to be more emotionally charged around the whole thing. We're going to be, well, as Brian was saying earlier, we're not going to be up in our cortex. We're going to be either in our limbic system, or might we be in our reptilian brain? I don't think so, but it's still there. And so we don't want to be too far up grid. And certainly that could be what is precipitating this. And we could get into deeper discussions around, well, how could someone be feeling that far upgrade that makes them want to heal a relationship? Well, maybe they truly miss you, or they're grieving over that gap that's been in their life now that they haven't been able to have the kind of closeness they've had with you for X amount of time. So I can certainly see how some upgrid elements might be present. There could also be some outgrid elements. So what could be going on outgrid that I would say to you, before you do that, you may very well want to move yourself in grid. Why did I put down outgrid here? In grid maneuvers.
Yeah, because if you're outgrid, I would think the biases will be quite strong because you got it. So you're not necessarily open to dialogue, because when you talk about like moving from upgrade to downgrade, what immediately came to my mind is this idea that I'm getting better and better at, which is getting grounded. I'm not sure if it was Kathy or Jane or one that mentioned something similar to that before in terms of embodiment. And I try to get grounded, which means that I'm operating from my own perspective and a rhythm that I can best contribute. Because if I'm too far upgrade or too far outgrade, then my response, however intentional it might be, is somewhat compromised. And I found myself in certain situations for that because I had a strong opinion about something. And again, I'm not a person that's easily get hyped up about things, but still, if my words you talked about the power words. If my words aren't uh, generating enough in terms of meeting the person where they are, then the situation is not going to have the greatest net value in that moment. And so I
Right,
try to
right,
get grounded from a perspective. I'm at least open to what's being said. Then I can make choices in terms of how
exactly.
to best contribute.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So what is the big danger you guys think about being too far out grid when you try to have a discussion that was intended to repair a relationship?
Well, I think that's where you're ready to fight.
Yep.
That's the
Mhm.
fight area. And so it's easy to get triggered and go
Mhm.
into defensive arguing and
Yeah.
being right.
And say, yeah, being right. See, I won, or whatever, you know. So, yeah, I think that's the essence of what the problem is with being too far out grid. Also, even if you don't have that desire to say, I told you so. The other thing that could be going on is that you're pushing for the relationship to be repaired faster than the relationship is ready to be repaired, if that makes
Mm.
sense.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
I can't force you to be my friend again. I can't force you to be relaxed and comfortable and loving and all that again. And that's the problem with a person who's got all that outgrid energy. They forget that, again, if you remember some of the phrases that characterize the center of the change grid, one of those phrases is that people in the center of the change grid realize that one cannot push the river nor pull the sprout, that things have to be allowed to unfold in their own natural time. And the problem is, if you're out grid, you're pushing the river, you're pulling the sprout, and this relationship that you're trying to repair is already damaged enough. It doesn't need more damage.
So
So
outgrid, you just want to kind of get it done?
yeah, like, I'm tired of all this nonsense. We're going to get along. It's like, that's just not the way it works. So yeah,
I
so
think
that
I
could be
might
it there.
suffer from that too, because
Yeah,
I'm quite
feeling.
content.
Yeah, is that what you might do? Is kind of like, now there's a difference between saying, look, we need to talk about this. Now at least I'm being an amiable driver, but a
Ah,
driven driver would be going like, damn it, blah, blah, blah. It's kind of, no, it's too aggressive. It's too out there. And so we just have to stay fully aware that where we are on the change grid, when we begin to have such a dialogue, is going to make a difference. Now, the likelihood of you being down grid and reaching out and having this discussion, those two things don't go together. Why would I say that if you're down grid, this discussion is unlikely to happen?
You would basically just say, I don't need to have the conversation.
Right,
There's no
right. And
reason
so,
for it.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, you don't have enough tension around the subject to even reach out to do it. So maybe you'll have the discussion if you kind of accidentally, circumstantially find yourself with the person, and rather than sitting close to one another and saying nothing, maybe a dialogue begins, but that's not where this kind of deliberate discussion is going to happen. And if anything, if you're too far in grid before you have this discussion, you might do something to kind of psych yourself up. So let's say, I mean, again, if you're an amiable energy, you're probably just going to stay into the wallpaper and hope it all goes away and resolves itself in some miraculous kind of way. But if you are a driven amiable energy, at least that energy says, I need to reach out. I'm not happy with things the way they are. I need to reach out. And so there's at least that element that now I need to do something to say, oh, then you got to have a plan. You need to have the confidence to be able to step out there and do it. So there's work to be done for those more reluctant reluctant reachers, if that's even a thing. It is now. Okay. So,
may I ask a quick
yep,
question?
please do.
Where would I'm trying this term or phrase I keep hearing all the time. I've been interviewing different providers about compliance and compliance officers and trying to study their relationship. And I keep hearing this phrase about, yeah, I have to have this come to Jesus talk. And I'm not
Oh
sure if I
yeah.
understand exactly what that means.
Okay, yeah, a come to Jesus meeting. I can tell you what it is from my experience. It's one of the messages that brings you to the altar, that lets you kind of know this is time to just have this discussion, to talk about the truth, to make decisions based on that truth, and there's no way out of this. So that's basically what a come to Jesus meeting is. It's when you're about to be hit with with the truth in no uncertain terms. And you either need to hear that truth, say hallelujah and amen, or you're going to burn in hell. So that's that's basically the shape of a
Or
come to Jesus.
you may be fired, or
Exactly.
it's like the push to the limit,
Right.
or at the breaking point.
Yeah, the last straw kind of
Yeah.
breaking sort of a thing. So, but so you know the origin, Brian, it comes from some um, more fundamentalist Christian. I was raised Southern Missionary Baptist, and I'm telling you, I certainly know what a come to Jesus meeting is. so, so it's got those kind of anchors, but
But it's
that's
not
what
a
it is.
good thing then, right?
It can be
So
a
that's
very good
what you
thing.
just described with this like outgrid, and the way that compliance director said that she had to speak to a physician,
Yeah.
that was more like a
It's
outgrid.
actually it's actually the most serious of the in-grid maneuvers. So if someone is in the out-grid danger zone, think about what that would feel like energetically, or how that would express itself behaviorally. That someone has to be willing to sit that person down and say to them, "You're out of bounds. The following behaviors are not permitted, and you are doing these behaviors. So you have a choice. You change your behavior, or you gather your goodies and go." So
Ah,
that's the kind of thing where you reach where I would say, sometimes no change occurs until someone says enough. Like right now, everyone's very sensitive to things like, well, discrimination in all of its forms, whether it's sexual harassment, whether it's relationship based on, or rather, prejudice, all these all sorts of things. Well, it got as bad as it's gotten because people tolerated a certain amount of it. And then it crossed a line. And once it crosses the line, now people are getting into what would fall in the category of the come to Jesus meeting, the straw that broke the camel's back. But it all goes to the in-grid maneuver of reviewing boundaries and someone having the courage to say, no, we are having this discussion. You are going to hear this. And you'll do with the information what you do with the information, but today is the day that you hear the truth. People that tend to be outgrid, characteristically of being in the a driven driver, is that the further outgrid you are, the more you believe that the rules don't apply to you, that you can get away with anything. And so you kind of view yourself as being impervious to whatever it may goes on, that, your mantra is it's easier to get forgiveness than it is to get permission. So you just barrel through, but you are, in the case of a business setting, perhaps a lawsuit waiting to happen. We've often said, particularly for sales representatives that live in the outgrid danger zone, they have a tendency to create policy on the fly because it gets the deal. So they'll promise the prospect anything and everything, and then come back to the office and say, well, that's what it took to get the deal. So you got to make it happen. And it's like, wait a second, we've got boundaries, we've got rules, we've got whatever. And so yes, there are times when that discussion, or that type of a discussion, needs to be had, but it's exclusively when people are behaving. Someone's got to be willing to tell the emperor that he has no clothes. I mean, wouldn't it be fun to see how many different metaphors can we come up with, to
but
illustrate
does
this?
that kind of conversation, how, I guess what I was trying to figure out, just based on what we've been talking about, is how does it position common ground? Because I think from that compliance director's
No,
perspective, if she's saying that physicians are some of the most resistant sometimes of these compliance things, and if she's
no,
trying to find common ground,
no.
and her perspective is I have to find,
Mm.
or I have to result to come to Jesus,
Yeah.
talks all the time,
Yeah.
I'm like, you're always going to be fighting. You're like a crisis manager.
Well,
That's
again, we have to think about, and again, everybody chime in. You're all unmuted. You can all, you're all allowed to talk, so you can unmute yourself locally, but chime in with what your thoughts are on this. But I can start it by saying to you that the kinds of dialogues that are possible change based on where you're on the change grid. I can't find common ground with someone who's in a danger zone,
ah,
any of the danger zones. And using common ground as a technique would be, well, inappropriate, but really it would just be unproductive. When someone is there, I have to use different techniques when people are in certain places, places on the change grid. Common ground we talked about before, and I know I'm not showing you, pardon me, the grid right now, because I think by now you guys have got it etched in your brains. But unless you're inside of that green circle, I don't know the common ground is going to be all that easy to find. Certainly, if I'm between the green circle and the red circle, negotiation has to occur. There's got to be give and take. So common ground is just about, let's just talk about what we absolutely positively already agree on. And then between the green line and the red line, what's workable? How can we make this happen? How can we satisfy both? So that's what that is. But outside of that red line, these are deal breakers. These are issues that are stopping the dialogue. And so your person, I don't know, are they an HR person? They may be
yes.
saying to you that we are not able to do common ground. We are beyond the negotiation. We have reached an impasse, but because we have at least some power, or we have a hand of cards that gives us the upper hand in whatever the game is, we're going to have one of these. I mean, we keep calling them come to Jesus meetings, but we need to review boundaries. We need to
Mhm.
review boundaries. Yeah.
T, the thing I always thought about with decision making is that the two parties didn't start at a high enough level where they could agree,
Yeah.
where they could agree as to what the overall objective was of what they were even trying to discuss. What
That's
do
right.
we want to accomplish here?
That's right. That's
And
right.
you got to keep moving outward until you find a point of connection to be able to move back inward.
I agree. I agree. And that's the whole thing. How do we begin to establish common ground? Um, well, that's a little bit deeper down on a little list here, but it has to do with about, can we identify what it is that we are even discussing? Is there a central topic or a handful of central topics? And what is it really all about? I need to find common ground about something, not just common ground in general, because we all like French fries. So, it's like that, that's not useful. It's
So,
something,
so
finding common ground. Yep.
can't we agree that we want a well-run, well-working company where
Right.
everyone feels that they're appreciated and contributing? I mean,
Yes.
let's start there. I mean, if we can just agree to that, then we can move on.
Right, right. And maybe we can develop start to flesh that list out. Do we want to have, do we agree that we'd like to have an organization that is a place people actually like to work, that people are, feel as though they're part of something that's making a difference, and, that alone might precipitate some negotiation where the person says, we just want to make money. Someone else says, we just want to make money. But you're absolutely right, David.
That's
So
good.
yeah, to Brian's point though, if she's saying the only technique she has available to her is a come to Jesus meeting, she may very well be correct. And that's fine, because you know what? When you say to someone, you are out of bounds, these are the boundaries, these are the consequences of being out of bounds, they're going to move in grid rather quickly if they want to stay in that situation. If they don't want to stay in that situation, then they're probably going to go ballistic and tell you what a fool you are as they, let the door slam behind them, sort of, sort of a thing. But they go like, okay, no, you're right. I didn't do it intentionally. I was trying to. All right, now we might move in grid enough that we can say, well, then let's talk about specifically what you did and other ways you might have been able to do it. Again, I'm in an HR mode. So So we might want to help them to have a negotiation in their own head about the different options and alternatives that were available to them that they chose not to take advantage of. And maybe we can move them all the way in grid and just let them understand the reason why we have these brand standards is because we are trying to have some common ground in the way that we all operate. So it's not only common ground is not only about what we do and why we do it. Common ground is also agreeing about how we go about doing certain things. And so,
Right.
yeah. So that's a very long answer to your rather short question, but there you go.
That was very helpful. I appreciate that.
Okay, so anyway, point is that before you step into having any one of these discussions, you need to make sure you're in the right place on the change grid. You might need to calm yourself, prepare what that conversation is going to be like in advance, at least get a few key questions that you want to pose in there. What's your opening going to be? You know, in many ways, it's like a sales call. So I need to have an opening. I need to do some exploration. I need to ask some questions because again, we're trying to understand before we seek to be understood. Now, the next thing that's on here, oh, and this thing we said, I think we mentioned it before, it may very well be that you don't want to have this conversation start by catching them off guard and just, you know, making a call out of the blue. Maybe you do want to open with more of an email or a text to invite them to, and I put down negotiations table, a truce, a ceasefire, you know, you want to invite them to clear the air, sort of a thing, but something just says, this is my intention, this is the spirit behind that intention, and maybe that begins by sending someone a note in one form or another.
Can I make express a thought?
Yes, please.
I wrote an article a while back, and I titled the article "Why It Should Be Your Fault."
Oh, do tell.
And the point was that if I walked into a meeting like that and said, Joe, we're here to talk about X, and I just want you to know before we get started that I realized that if I had done X or Y or Z, or B was in place, this may never have occurred in the first place. So I want you to know I'm learning something from this meeting to begin with.
Yeah, very good. And that learning that you did may very well have been what led you to reaching out.
That's exactly right. So you kind of take the power away from the emotion by being the first to accept responsibility. And then you go into it and say, now let's look at what happened.
Right, right. Because there's no reason for them to attack you if you've already attacked yourself.
So you run the chain, then you just run the path to self-discovery.
Exactly, exactly.
Wow, that's
Yeah,
good.
yeah. Perfect, perfect. Now, I do.
Would you share that article with us? I'd really like to read that.
I would too.
Yeah, David, if you can dig it up, you just send it over to me, and I can distribute it, or is it up on your blog or whatever? Just let us know how people.
It's in my LinkedIn profile page. All my articles are there. I have about 43 more extensive articles, and I make maybe paragraph long posts from time to time because those get noticed much more quickly than a long dissertation of thought. But if you go to my LinkedIn page, David B. Harrell in Grand Blanc, Michigan, that's blank with a C. The picture is a little deceiving, but it's me, I promise you.
So I just chatted over everyone how David spells his name, Grand Blanc, Michigan, a northern suburb of Detroit.
Right.
I think you probably think of it as a northern suburb of Detroit more than a southern suburb of Flint.
Yes, and it's very cold today, by the way, I'd like you to know. Sunny, but it was 29 degrees when I got up.
There you go. Yeah, I was going to say it's cold here too. We're all the way down into the 60s. Such a different world, isn't it? Yeah, anyway, there you go.
Kathy, this is a bit off topic, but one of my favorite movies in the whole world is Grosse Pointe Blank.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My wife is from Grosse Pointe.
Yeah. There's several Grosse Points if you're looking around that.
Woods, farms.
Farms, plain old Grosse Pointe. And by the way, for those who don't know, David is the ChangeWorks professional with the greatest longevity among our people.
Next
So
year will be 30 years.
30 years David's been
Wow.
associated with us.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you
Yep,
very
yep,
much.
Yep.
Yeah,
So
and I've often said, and I don't mean to, cut in T, but T's the most significant professional mentor of my entire career.
Wow.
I appreciate that very much.
That's
Thank you.
awesome.
Yeah. Glad I could serve a role. Yep.
Very
So,
well.
well, I really do appreciate it. I also am humbled by that because I think what I bring to everybody is really knowledge and insights that have been gained from so many others. And if I have any talent at all, it's that I do have a bit of an ability to be a sponge to absorb all these kinds of thoughts. And then I have the ability to kind of, I don't know, condense it or somehow or another package to present it and fit it into an overall system. So, I wish I could say I own any of this, but the truth is all I've really done is, I do the merging of brilliance. That's what my whole career has been.
So
So
somebody had to do it.
well, and I
Exactly.
appreciate that, but it's for whatever reason, that's what I do. Thank you for that. Okay, so my next little point here is about insulating yourself from your own behavioral tribal tendencies. Do you guys know what I mean by tribal tendencies? Those of you who've studied group behavior, group dynamics.
Absolutely.
Unpack that a little bit more.
Well, tribal tendencies just say that you as an individual may very well behave very, very differently when you associate yourself with a group of people who have a particular set of values, beliefs, behaviors, etc. We have a tendency to want to belong to a group. And that's that tribal tendency. We want to become part of a tribe. So even though we may not believe with everything that the tribe seems to be presenting, we resonate with it sufficiently enough that we feel as though we're a bit of a member. So we can end up saying and doing and supporting things that as an individual we would never do. But because we're part of the group, we feel kind of obligated to be a
Oh,
tribe
okay.
member.
Got it. I was over that as a teenager.
Yeah, well, that's because tribal tendencies express itself in a lot of different ways. Peer pressure is certainly a form of tribal tendency behavior, but there's lots of things like, you know, why in college do you get divided into sophomores and juniors and whatever? You're creating tribes. I mean,
Yeah.
which house in Harry Potter are you? So I happen to be a Ravenclaw, thank you. But there's, everybody's got their own little. We have a need to feel like we are part of a tribe, but we have to be very careful that we don't bring those tribal tendencies into a discussion that we're trying to have as an individual with another individual. So,
Yeah.
because the two tribes are separate and distinct for a reason. And that's because they're celebrating what makes them unique. If they only
Right.
focus on what made them similar, what would happen to the tribes?
Wouldn't have one.
Here.
They
What
merge.
happened?
They would merge.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that would be fine. So right now we have this is expressing itself quite a bit because this subject is about healing relationships that got messed up during the whole campaign and election sort of a situation. So there were these two major tribes, Democrats and Republicans, like those are the only two possibilities that even exist out there. Well, how many of you might say, I'm not a 100% Republican and I'm not a 100% Democrat. I'm kind of like a little bit of both, someplace in between or something entirely different, but I don't have a place I can belong. So I have no choice but to affiliate myself with whatever tribes are available to me, or I'm an outsider.
Yeah, that's what I was meaning. That I got over that as a kid because remember, in Africa, all Africans belong to a tribe.
Yeah, right.
So the more we traveled, and I'm traveling around, like when we went to Kenya, I was Mzungu. Mzungu is the Swahili word for outsider.
Mhm.
So you imagine, kids are mean. And so you're in the school circles, and I'm a Zungu to other blacks and to whites. So I had to learn then how to adapt and use the power of inquiry to
That's
assimilate
right.
and
That's right.
still hold on to my own culture. So
That's
I
right.
had that adaptation quite early.
Yeah. And even what you said about kids are mean because they view that behavior as helping them become a member of a tribe.
Exactly.
So I don't
That's
even know
all
if
they
they
know.
know that the tribe has been identified, but they're trying to separate themselves from that. In Native American cultures, it's divided into clans all across, Europe. There are clans that are involved and all that. So this whole idea about associating yourself with some sort of a tribal tendency is part of it. We have to remember that when we're talking to another person, I am not my tribe and they are not their tribe. We're just individuals, and that means that we may very well have far more in common than our respective tribes might have in common. So what's the whole point of sororities and fraternities? It's all goes back to tribal tendencies.
Hmm.
Tribal tendencies. Oh, and I'll give you another one. How many of you recognize that tribes exist inside of our profession? So
Oh yeah,
what,
definitely.
you're a certified coach. Oh, are you a PCC? Are you an MCC? Are you, what are you? Um, or if you're a consultant, oh, with one of the big firms or, whatever. It's like, it's all, you went to college, Ivy League, private school, state universities, a community college, there's all these different tribal segregations. Lynn has been doing quite a bit of study recently about different forms of caste systems. So Lynn, if you want to unmute, what's the name of that book that you've been reading? You may not be there, but
No,
yeah,
the name of the book is Caste, Caste,
yeah,
by, I can't remember her first name, Wilkerson. She's a Pulitzer Prize winner author, and the book is amazing.
yeah. But it's all about not just caste systems as they exist in India, but how caste systems are really everywhere.
About how caste systems around the world, how the history of caste systems. It's what you learn in the book is that, like you were just saying, there are caste systems that you think India, but they're everywhere.
Yep, yep, yep,
Yeah.
yep. And again, the whole point of me bringing this little talking point up is that I think it's very important for when we get into these conversations, we realize it's an individual talking to an individual. I do not represent my tribe, whatever it is. Oh, by the way, if you really study it, no one is a member of only one tribe. You're members of multiple tribes, depending on what part of your life you're looking at. So, okay, anyway, so that's it. So insulate yourself from your own behavioral tribal tendencies. Don't bring your tribe with you into whatever this discussion happens to be. The tribe isn't there. And then we also talked about before that it's not a competition. It isn't win-lose. We want to talk about win-win as much as we can. And I have a pumpkin story. I don't know how many of you guys know my pumpkin story.
No.
It's a strange story because while it illustrates a point, it still means, yeah, but hasn't a crime been committed? So it's a story with flaws if you really decide to think about it. But the story goes like this. So there's this guy who's a pumpkin farmer, and he's the world's biggest pumpkin farmer. And he's got pumpkins galore everywhere, prize-winning pumpkins. So pumpkins, acres upon acres upon acres upon acres of pumpkins. But right next to his house, he has a tiny little garden that he maintains all by himself, his little private pumpkin patch. So every day he goes out, he looks at his pumpkins. One day he goes out and he notices that one of his pumpkins is missing. And so he thinks, well, some animal must have gotten in and taken a pumpkin. So he puts up a scarecrow and, puts up a little bit of a fence reinforcement and on and on. Comes out a couple days later, notices another pumpkin is missing. So now he thinks there's a pumpkin thief that's coming in and stealing pumpkins from him. So he puts up a sign that says, no trespassing, thieves will be prosecuted, blah, 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 thinking that'll stop the person. Well, a few days later, comes out, another pumpkin is missing. So he doesn't know what to do. He keeps losing pumpkin after pumpkin, day after day. So he comes up with an idea. He puts a sign up that says, one of the pumpkins is poisoned. And lo and behold, next day, all the pumpkins are there. And the day after that, all the pumpkins are there. Well, one day comes and he gets a knock at the door, and it's one of his foremen working out way out on the acreage. And he says, you have to come and see this. They go out into the field surrounded by pumpkins as far as the eye can see. And there's a sign that says, wrong, 2 of the pumpkins are poisoned. Okay, and so the moral here, at least the way they presented it, was that if you don't create a win-win situation, you're going to end up, you could easily end up with a lose-lose situation. And so of course, now I'm thinking like, yes, but a crime has been committed here. The guy was stealing pumpkins. So am I really just doing something? Are you telling me that in a win-win situation, I've got to do something that somehow or another lets this thief get away with it? Or makes it possible for the person to have something they don't deserve for free? And that then allows us to move the dialogue into a negotiable environment. So, you know, we have to be able to work something out. Why is this person stealing a pumpkin? Is it because they're hungry? If it's because they're hungry, is there anything in your wealth of pumpkins that you might be able to share with those who are in need? So you get the idea. It starts off being a great little story, but then the story is supposed to make the audience go, well, wait a minute. That's not really a win-win. That's blah blah blah, and then you can come on with something else. But you get the idea. We need to make sure that we realize this is not a competition, because if we don't work towards creating a win-win, we could easily end up with a lose-lose.
Mhm.
Yep. So win and lose doesn't really work, particularly in relationship sorts of situations. So there you go. Questions, comments about the pumpkin story?
That's interesting.
I
Yeah.
remember that story.
Yeah, I told it in probably in the sales training program. It fits in someplace. I'd have to dig through. Okay, so we need to find common ground. Now, I found this quote from some group. I wish I'd left the citation in around it, but this is an actual quote that I found as I was out there Googling. And it says, democracy is all about differences unifying a group. We must engage in dialogue to make that work. We can't make informed decisions with partial understanding. So if we politely ignore our differences and stop discourse, we are all left with the most polarizing voices in our head.
Mm.
So isn't that an interesting little statement? Because I went like, well, that very much applies to groups at large, but doesn't this also apply to all the relationships we have with individuals?
Mhm.
So what unifies us? What unifies us are the differences that we have and the similarities that we share. So we're not unified if we're only a partial, piece of who we are. So we have to engage in dialogue to make those relationships work. We can't make the right decisions and do the right things if we only have partial understanding of that person. So if we politely ignore our differences and stop the discourse, I mean, put that in bold letters or whatever, because how many people figure the only way they're going to be able to get back with their family and with their friends and with their neighbors is to just ignore those differences and stop the discourse? Well, we end up now being left with only the most polarizing voices remaining in our heads. And what does
Like
that
reading
mean?
a lot of biographies, and I seem to remember reading about Dr. Martin Luther King wrote something similar or akin to that in his Birmingham jail cell. And he says people fight each other because they don't know each other. They don't know each other because they're different. They're different because they're separated. They're separated because they haven't come to the table. So the
Mhm.
idea is to get everyone a seat at the table where we can respect one another.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so the point would be then that if we don't have dialogue, we're not making any improvements. We just have the illusion of an improvement. We have some sort of, I forget what the word is in warfare, but détente, I guess. We're just kind of like at a bit of an impasse where at least we're not shooting each other, but we're
Ceasing of
hardly
hostility.
unified again.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep. So now, so we have to go into the spirit that we care more about one another than we do about any unique opinion or on a particularly specific subject. And I think, as we talked about last time around, things are still very raw for a lot of people, and some of the issues were particularly raw for them. It may simply not be time for them to share this belief. But in bottom line truth, we all have more in common than we have, in opposition with one another. So we're always going to have different viewpoints about different subjects and things like that. But can't we just celebrate what we really have together? So the point here is that we're going into this with that as a spirit. And remember, we're not striking up conversations with total strangers. This is about healing relationships that we always had, but got injured somewhere along the way, got thrown into some sort of conflict. So we already care about this person. We may very well love this person as a family member, but for whatever reason, we're just at odds. Well, we're not at odds as people. We're at odds about some opinion or specific subject, but that's a tiny little fraction of who we may be as people. So, yeah. Now, going back to what David said, we need to start speaking from the I. So yeah, I talked about before, we're going to be asking questions, seek to understand before we seek to be understood. But as we begin this discussion, if we go back to sales training, for example, sooner or later, we have to have an entree and a foray. We have to have some statement that gets things going. And I think it's very important that we speak from the I. What is my personal, intimate, authentic truth? And the truth is, as David was pointing out, that I have a responsibility in this relationship taking a turn, or I have a responsibility in the way that you came to feel. I'm not responsible for your feelings. I'm not going to say that out loud, but I'm certainly responsible for perhaps the scenario that gave rise to it, or I'm certainly responsible for my behavior that happened during whatever it is that led to this fraction. Yeah, so you get the idea there. Speak from the I, your personal, intimate, authentic truth. Don't talk about they, don't talk about we, don't talk about deferring it to somebody else from some other time period or whatever. Talk about your own personal, intimate, authentic truth, because you're the person who's trying to get the relationship back. It goes people to people. Thoughts about that?
That's good.
Yeah, sounds great.
Yeah, I don't want to say to them, I just really want you to understand where we're coming from. Okay, I don't want to talk about your tribe. I don't want to hear about your tribe. So I want to hear about you. What are you thinking about? So I got to speak from the I, and I want to encourage them to also speak from that same I. So. Okay, now as you start to have this dialogue speaking from that personal, intimate, authentic truth, hopefully you can do these next four little things, identifying whatever shared values you have that are being met in the current situation. So even whatever happened, let's talk about what remains or what still might be okay. So what shared values are met? What shared values could be met? And then it's also nice if you can find something that the two of you share that neither one of you are happy about, but you'd like to see something done about it. So identified shared values that are not met in the current situation. And so I shared with you guys before that for me, a very big issue is healthcare. And so I don't know that anybody's got anything close to the right solution to the whole thing. So maybe I can say, look, whatever else is at odds we have together, can we both agree that when it comes to the way healthcare happens in the United States, there's work to be done? I don't know anyone who would say, oh no, our healthcare system is absolutely perfect. It's like, really? Have you gone to the emergency room? Because like, I think Linda might have shared this with you. She went to the pool and it was a hot day and she was wearing her hat and she had her sunscreen on and she was sitting under a shelter for most of it. Linda, you're unmuted. You can share your story if you want, but honestly, she doesn't remember it all that well because unbeknownst to her, A whole hour plus went by and she hadn't drank any water. Next thing you know is she's on the ground. An ambulance has been called to take her barely a mile to the emergency room and for them to, give her some fluids or whatever the case may be. Can you imagine that that bill, including the ambulance, was over $5,000?
Yeah.
So anyone who thinks that's
Room.
okay, it's like, what?
Yeah. Emergency room, ICU, critical care, those are considered like premium packages in healthcare
I'm
billing.
sure, but so you just get the idea. I think that we want to look for what do we already have in common, but if we can also identify something that is not met in the current situation, maybe we now have a mission, a vision, a purpose that we can work together to try to make some sort of a change. So it's not just about being okay with one another. It's also that there's an opportunity to join together, to have a reason to be back together. Does that make sense for you guys?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep,
Yes.
that's good.
All y'all, there's a whole flock of you on the call, so feel free to unmute and chime in. So that's it. We want to share whatever those values are. We do need to, though, talk about, because moving forward at a certain point, we need to say, I never want to have our relationship go the way that it went in this situation ever again. So let's just talk about some negotiable and some non-negotiable elements of how how our relationship works. And this is where we get into this next little section about establishing brand standards. Now, in pride-based leadership, we talk about this purely from the leadership and management kind of perspective. And we say inside of any organization, just like they have brand standards about how their products are developed and distributed and customer service, so they have brand standards. Why don't they also have brand standards about the way that they treat one another, the way they treat their employees, the way they treat vendors, etc.? And so just like we would say they need to establish some sort of interpersonal brand standards. Similarly, I thought maybe we need to have a set of brand standards inside of a specific relationship. So and we say this is it, and the way the exercise works in pride-based leadership, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, is that you make a whole long laundry list of all the things that they've shared about the way people treat one another, good stuff, bad stuff, whatever it is. And usually we did that on a whiteboard or on flip sheets. For a while, this exercise is usually the last exercise done in pride-based leadership. And so people at a certain point wonder, why have we written all that stuff down? Or what are we ever going to do anything with that? Yeah, these are the behaviors that we are now going to move into 5 different categories. So of all the behaviors we've listed here on the wall, which of these behaviors would you say are absolutely mandatory, that every single person who works in this organization is expected to exhibit this behavior when it comes to communicating with one another? Other behaviors may not be mandatory, but we encourage them. Other behaviors, we go like, I'm on the fence. For example, I think that I would say arguing about a situation. Well, arguing is not always a bad thing. What happens, I mean, how you're arguing might have some bad things that are going on it, but the fact that people can have debates and heated discussions and even outright arguments about something is not necessarily a bad thing. And so you might go like, well, arguing is neutral. The other things are going to be discouraged. We go like, okay, yeah, I get it. But other things are forbidden. So for example, if in the heat of an argument, I become loud, I might say, we discourage you from having a loud voice or becoming that energized around something, but it's not a forbidden behavior. Now, if it's name calling and attacking and physical, okay, these things are forbidden. So you guys get the idea? We can take a look at any behavior that someone might exhibit while communicating and say, some of these things are going to be mandatory, some things are encouraged, etc. So get the overall spirit of what the whole point of brand standards would be.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. So give me an idea about what kinds of behaviors you might say would be mandatory. And again, we're healing a relationship. So let's see if we can come up with behaviors that would be mandatory inside of a one-on-one relationship.
Respect.
Being respectful of one another. Yep. What else?
Listening.
Listening. Now, listening was one that we originally put into the encouraged category. But only because we wanted to be sensitive to the fact that as people move on the around on the change grid, they can lose their ability to listen effectively and still not cross into a danger zone.
Hmm.
So, but at least try to listen. You know, I go, that's mandatory. That's mandatory. But yeah, so give me some other ideas. What do you guys think? Or throw out a behavior and tell me what category you might put it in.
I would say be present.
Okay, being present. And so is that mandatory, encouraged, neutral? Where's it at?
I would say it's mandatory or encouraged. I would say it's mandatory,
Yeah,
but it
now,
may not be possible in from all places on the change grid.
right. And remember, well, then I'll tell you a little bit more from the definitions we gave during the thing. When we say mandatory, we say you must do it every single time. There is no exception made to the rule ever. And when
Mm.
we say it's forbidden, it's you must never do this. You do it once and it's a deal breaker. So these are extreme. Mandatory and forbidden are extreme. So most things end up falling into the encouraged and discouraged categories. So I love the idea about, wouldn't it be great if everyone actually had the ability to be present? Or maybe we said that it's mandatory that at the start of every one of these discussions, we do something to center ourselves. How does that feel, Kathy?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I do with a lot of, many of the groups that I work with. It's let's just get centered at the beginning so that we can start from a place of center and move forward
Yeah.
from there.
See, now to me, what you've done is you've just said that as far as your role as a facilitator, this is a mandatory structural element that I put into the way I interact with audiences and all that. So for you, it's mandatory. Now, for a lot of them, it might be a brand new experience. So maybe at the end of the day, you encourage them to continue to replicate that same practice.
Yes.
But if we made it mandatory, you really have to fire people. So
Well, confidentiality would be mandatory.
there you go. Confidentiality should be mandatory. Yep. And so things that go to the mandatory category generally be those things. Can't call people names. Some companies actually wanted to put swearing. It was absolutely forbidden to do that. I mean, nobody could say the slightest little curse word. And I said, well, I would put it into the discouraged category, but maybe you want to make F-bombs forbidden. So you get the idea. I think that it's an important thing to just say after you've had your initial healing, you want to make sure you are preparing the ground for a lifetime of a healthier relationship. And that's when you go like, so let's just have some brand standards. Can we agree that okay, I'll give you an example. How many of you have ever heard that you should never go to bed angry with the person you love?
Yes.
Okay, and so is that mandatory or is that encouraged? That you do something to clear the air so nobody goes to bed angry. Yeah,
It's
so
encouraged.
it's very much encouraged. And then, or you just go, how many of you have ever had a relationship with someone who they have a tendency to hold their thoughts in, their feelings in, and unless you do something deliberately to pull them out, those thoughts and feelings out, you may never hear them, but you're observing all of this angst, aggression, anger, whatever it happens to be. You can see it clearly, but they won't verbalize it. So where you say inside of a relationship, what's that person's responsibility for verbalizing whatever is going on? So, if I said not holding back, speaking your mind freely, these would be more encouraged, mandatory, neutral.
Encouraged.
Encouraged
Same.
very much.
I would say
Yeah,
encourage, but working toward mandatory.
absolutely. That I should be able to
mastery.
expect, that you're
Yeah.
not in any threat or anything like that. So share what you want to share. I'm trying to come up with a neutral one where maybe,
Be on time.
yeah, okay, there you go.
Well, and I
I
think
don't
that
know.
would be
Yeah, I'd
encouraged
encourage it.
or
Yeah.
mandatory.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
Be
Well,
prepared.
and pardon me, David, was that?
Be prepared.
Yeah, being prepared. For even that, I might encourage. When we first put the list together, there was no neutral. You couldn't sit in the middle of the fence. You had to like lean either towards encouraged or discouraged. And I can't remember now, but people came up with some neutral sorts of things.
Smile.
Yeah, like smiling, those sorts of things. They just kind of went like, well, some people smile and some people don't. And yeah, some people initiate dialogue, some people don't. So there are some things that I just think belong in neutral, but most is going to be encouraged or discouraged. A few things will be mandatory, a few things will be forbidden. Like in a relationship, if it's a meaningful relationship with someone else, we might say that a mandatory behavior is that we don't end until we shake hands or hug. So we have some act of closure around it. We might say that's a mandatory thing. Don't you walk out that door without shaking my hand. Don't you walk out that door without giving me a hug. Now we have COVID to worry about. So that might, you need to bow deeply.
punching my elbow.
Yeah, elbow to elbow, whatever it happens to be. Okay, well, we're at the top of the hour, and as much as I wanted to finish what was on our little list, there's a few things left to go over. Most of it is really just the kinds of things that we might teach in a class along this subject line. And again, I was trying to use this dialogue as a way to come up with an activity list that we could use to create a change grid specifically around what kinds of skills are involved in being able to repair relationships effectively. And so I put down things like practice good traditional listening skills. So why we might want to summarize, put yourself in their position to understand, demonstrate, acknowledge, so those kinds of things. So I think a lot of this stuff is stuff that all of us have actually taught classes on. So pledging our support, asking to be heard, focusing on issues. So am I right? Do we need to go through these, or do you guys kind of go like, oh no, I've taught that a dozen times or more? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Because okay, good. Then I think for now we can move this subject matter to the finished for now kind of category. I am going to want to revisit it in the not so distant future because, again, I think with things being the way they are right now, it may still be early for us to start having many of these discussions we want to have. So I thought I'd put together the activity list, and then I'd ask you guys to fill out the activity list. So we can then get everybody back together and say, okay, these are the skills associated with repairing relationships. Let's see how all of you are plotting, and then go from there. So so that was my thought. Yeah. Questions about that? Yeah. Life's always better with an activity list. So let's let's put a change grid together and see where we end up.
Hey, Steve, before we go, you could or stop the recording, but I seem to have lost my Tuesday invitation.
Oh, okay. Well, let me go ahead. I'll stop the recording. Oh no, I won't. This is fine. I can edit it out. I will make a note to send it to you again. Linda's going to be broadcasting what the next subject is for next Tuesday and Thursday's calls. So the link will be in there. But also, if you go to our YouTube channel, and you look at any of the older Circle of Brilliance calls, I also put the link inside of all of those.
Okay.
So, but the easiest for us to just email it over to you again. And
Great. Thank you
can
so much.
go from there. Yep, you're welcome. Okay, anything else, anybody?
Oh, Thank you very much.
You're
Yeah,
welcome.
thanks.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Great call.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. Okay. Well, thanks everybody. So have a great weekend. We'll talk again on Tuesday. So bye for now.
Yeah.
Thank you.